Hello, welcome to another video. Lars Panaro has joined me to talk about the Saturn Mars conjunction, and we are going to decode the Dasha periods, the Chakra Dasa periods for the Saturn Mars conjunction chart. Thanks, Lars, for joining.
Thanks for having me.
So, we'll just quickly get going because anyway, 20 minutes is turning out to be 2 hours for us. So.
Yeah. All right, there it is.
Right. So, okay. Yeah, this is the chart. We have Aries rising and with Rahu and Moon in the second house and
Yeah.
and Ketu in the seventh house. So there is kind of an inherent Kala Sarpa in this chart with Rahu and Ketu in Aries Libra axis with
Right.
Moon joining Rahu. And we have Saturn and Mars in Capricorn, Venus and Jupiter in Aquarius, Mercury and the Sun in Pisces, and Mercury is not really in a great condition. So it's I don't know how to put, but I think the theme of this chart, besides Kala Sarpa, it seems to be a Saturn Mars conjunction, obviously, but I think the Saturn Mars conjunction in the 10th house of the conjunction chart. 10th house is indicative of the governments, and 10th house is the significator of the king. So the planet that rules the 10th house is the ruler of the king. So Saturn is placed in the 10th house in a very in its own domicile, obviously.
Yeah, and I think the most important thing about this conjunction, perhaps, is the fact that any two planets this close together are engaged in something called planetary war, which is based upon their latitude. And in this particular case, my understanding is that Mars is winning the planetary war. Yeah. So that's really important to keep in mind because Mars is also exalted.
Right.
And both planets appear to even be in the bounds of Mars. So this is a very strong, very powerful Mars. But the good news is, and we'll see we'll see about applying this to what you said about the 10th house of rulers and governments. I mean, I think that's very relevant. So Saturn ruling governments and rulers along with the sun in this case as the Naisargika Karaka of such matters. And that's in the 12th of downfall and hidden enemies, assassinations, things like this. So it's kind of a theme playing out. But what I did want to say is that everybody's been I know everybody's been aware of or talking about what I call the slap that was heard around the world at the Oscars. And I take this, actually, though, the one positive thing I take from that incident is that it is kind of a good omen for this Saturn Mars conjunction, because for me, when I reflected on it, I saw Will Smith as the Martian element, exalted. He's exalted. He's bigging himself up. Exalted planets big themselves up. They're kind of like a peacock, showing off to its mate, or a cat. If you've ever seen a cat make its tail and its fur look really big to scare off predators, it's really kind of an awesome sight to behold, but there's not really much underneath it. So exalted planets are kind of like that. They can deliver massive amounts of whatever, but they don't always the core of what they deliver will remain, but but a lot of the other stuff ends up being kind of just fluff. It's not really there to stay. So anyway, so what happened is Mars as Will Smith smacked Saturn as Chris Rock. And if you notice, without getting into who was right, who was wrong, or any of that, I'm not going there in this video. But Chris Rock made a very, very quick comeback. He didn't collapse. He didn't start crying. He didn't fight back. He didn't storm off stage, right? He regained his composure almost instantly, and he did what he had to do to finish out what he was hired to do. And so again, love him or hate him,
but I think that was a good professional
it was
attitude.
very stoic, and
it's easy to be carried away by emotions, especially that juncture, but I think he handled it reasonably well. So
right, and so this to me is kind of a metaphor for what's going on here, or what we can expect in a way with this conjunction. However we see it unfolding is like this metaphor of Mars is gonna hit Saturn, whatever that means, however that works out in life. Martial things are gonna hit Saturnic things, but Saturn is gonna bounce back pretty quickly. And we also see that illustrated by the fact that at the end of the day, Capricorn is Saturn's own sign, right? So even though he loses the war, it's not like a total devastation. And some people may be wondering, well, why are you taking that one event to be an omen for this stellar omen? Well, because basically, like Shakespeare said, all the world's a stage, right? So everything reflects everything else. And when you have two massively famous people that are literally famous all over the world, involved in something like this, it mirrors a greater collective movement of consciousness. It tells us something about just a certain direction that things are going, in a big way. And so do the small things too. I mean, so do the smallest things. Like if you or I were to go outside and or whatever, or just sit here and sincerely ask for an omen for this Saturn Mars conjunction so that we could better navigate it, right? We would get some kind of an omen. We would get some kind of an illustration.
Yeah, there is always an indication or symbolism.
So I just wanted to point that out. I think that no matter what happens, because I looked at this as like, oh, this is really not a great sign that Mars is winning in light of the Ukraine situation, and of course any other wars, because there are several other wars being waged on the planet that most of the time we don't hear about. But I was really concerned, like, okay, violence and bloodshed is going to go way up. This could be really bad. But the slap omen makes me feel a bit better about it, because again, whoever gets pummeled is going to probably make a decent comeback. And I mean, we're already seeing that in Ukraine. We've been seeing that. So hopefully stuff like that continues. Hopefully the underdogs are not demolished.
And one more interesting thing that I kind of was thinking about is the placement of, the conjunction of Saturn and Mars that's actually happening almost at the end of the sign, which is always considered to be an old age, or probably Mrityu stage for planets, if you talk about avastas. So sure. I was thinking if this thing might not actually be so powerful as people kind of think that it is. So
that's a good point. Yeah.
But I think we have to wait and see. We cannot conclude at anything without things happening. But still, obviously, Saturn and Mars both powerful in the 10th house is not really a great thing. And there's been so much of accidents. So apart from the slap thing and the Ukraine thing, there are so many accidents that are taking place, like a fighter jet crashed in China, and in India also something happened. So there is a lot of accidents that are taking place during this time, and especially to the government vehicles. So which is the 10th house is government. So it's quite. I think things started playing out far more early, because I think Saturn and Mars entered into a whole sign conjunction long back, probably before 1 month,
Sure.
and only now they are actually conjunct by degrees, which is true conjunction. But they were in the same sign for more than a month now. So
Right. Right.
it's normal that things have already started taking place. And the good thing is, like, we, I mean, the 10th house itself is hugely influenced by malefic presence. But the one silver lining is that the nodes are not connected to the 10th house by hard aspect. So which is a good thing, as far as I'm concerned, because
Sure.
we really don't want the nodes to be kind of I think there's some mistake in this chart. Like, Rahu is already moved to Aries by April, but
Wait.
no, I think it's better to look at this chart. So
Okay.
right, so the date is same, but I think there is some Ainamsha problem. It's okay. So the no, no. In this case, we have a really good connection, so it's tightly squared. So the
Yeah.
nodes
Yeah.
are,
That's right. The nodes are tightly square Saturn, Mars.
yeah,
So that's also, I mean, geez, that's really tight. So
yeah,
that definitely makes for a lot more, um, unpredictable elements to enter into whatever kind of happens. But you know what? What's also interesting though is that I remember there's something from Firmicus Maternus specifically about Mars Saturn conjunction, and he regards it as being actually very auspicious, because he basically says that Saturn cools and calms Mars, and Mars kind of gives warmth
right,
and fire to Saturn. So they kind of like it's kind of like rubbing two sticks together and you get fire, but you get a controlled flame that you can benefit from, you can utilize and direct. So in this sense, it kind of agrees with like a sort of classical Jyotish approach to things, which is that two negatives make a positive.
right,
It's auspicious to have malefics in malefic houses or malefic lords in other malefic houses, right? And you get the like a Viparit Raj Yoga,
yeah,
for example, where a kind of a loss or a tragedy occurs, but then something auspicious comes out of it, some kind of gain comes out of it. And some people would argue about this, but it's like technically Mars and Saturn here are forming a kind of Raj Yoga, right? Like a Karma Dharma Adipati Yoga to a certain degree, because Saturn is a angular lord, Mars is an angular and a trinal lord, right? Although Parashara seems to tell us that Saturn, for example, can't form yoga for this ascendant for Aries because it rules the 11th house. So
right.
there's
And it's also not the Dharma Karmadipati Yoga, because for Dharma Karmadipati Yoga, you need the conjunction or connection between 9th and 10th rulers. But I get what you say. It's the Raja Yoga because the first Lord and the 10th Lord forming a conjunction in the 10th house. And one planet is in exaltation and another planet is in its own sign. So
right.
It's a powerful
And
Raja Yoga. And I also think that the governments are going to be very adamant at this point, because Saturn kind of brings that inherent adamant nature to kind of hold on to their values or their policies or statements or whatever it may be in a more rigid manner. And
right.
we are currently seeing that example, because Indian government has decided to buy oil from Russia, and they're very clear about their stand. So they just want to put their economic uh, um, necessities ahead of whatever is happening in the world. So
Sure.
so that's I'm not judging anything, but I think that's the stand that India has taken. And anyone who has been criticizing that particular stand, India has been really reacting in a very uh, Martian way. Like they kind of just it's not like they're sitting silent. Usually, what India does is they don't respond to any kind of things. But what happens now is like India is retaliating for any statement that comes from the West that kind of condemns or criticizes about India's decision to buy oil from Russia. But what
Sure.
India does is like they kind of get back to them in a very Martian way. And which is kind of India's adamant. India is just putting their economic necessities ahead of anything that happens. So that is
Sure.
one of the literal manifestations of this, rigidity that we might see. So
Yeah. Yeah, that's a good point. It is kind of like, and I mean, it is like a very Martian sort of approach to be like, we just want to focus on securing our material resources here, like
right,
forget everything else and that kind of a thing.
yes. So and
but yeah, I think the nodal emphasis makes things yes, like prone to a lot of reactivity, and kind of probably acting and thinking in ways that run counter to any sort of logic or
right. And
and the moon being so close to Rahu also would reinforce that. That kind of does make me a bit nervous, in some ways.
right.
I'm not going to lose sleep over it, but it's like they're not in the same sign, but
Yes.
they're very close by degree. And even Mars and Saturn are arguably square the moon, even though it's out of sign. It's an out of sign square. But I think it's fair to kind of
consider the sign square and feel good about it.
Well, the out of sign square, because they're only 7 degrees shy of a square with the moon, so I don't know. I mean, fortunately the moon has some really great dignity there in Taurus, obviously.
Yeah, right. Yes.
But since it's square Venus, its
well.
lord.
Which is reception.
So with reception, yeah. So that's so the people, the mind, whatever, the
finances.
Yeah, finances, these are all getting some degree of security here,
right?
I suppose, for this conjunction
period of time. That again kind of goes back to the Indian reaction. Not only Indian reaction, but still Europe is completely dependent on Russian oil. Again, we have to go back to Russia-Ukraine crisis, because that is kind of so prominent, and it's kind of calling the shots as far as what is happening in the world today, both economically and politically, and probably even socially. So although many European countries have a few European countries have taken the opposite side of Russia, but they have not stopped buying oil from Russia. So everyone is putting their economy and their finances as top priority. That is clearly shown in this chart as well. The moon is in Taurus, so it's about needs, it's safety. So but before 7 or 8 days, there was a news saying that Putin had agreed for the European countries to pay in euros for oil. But again, I think yesterday I saw a news where Putin is again stressing upon paying in RUB. So it's kind of very Putin is again he's very particular about what he wants and what is better for Russian economy, because of the sanctions we see that Russian economy is battered. So at least it will take some time for recovery, but but I think it is an economic masterstroke in what Putin did, is asking asking for payments in RUB instead of USD or euro or whatever it may be. I think USD is the primary currency for oil dealings or any trade that happens in the world. So,
Interesting.
but this RUB, this stress upon RUB by Russia is again indicative of the fact that every country is looking for its own economic security at this point. And one more.
Yeah, and that kind of reflects that, I think, that moon in the second house
Yes.
with Rahu and also square Venus and all that. Like, this is very much give me my piece of the pie.
Right.
What's mine is mine, and that kind of a thing. You know, a very myopic, sort of blinded by sheer greed and vital desires and whatnot. And you know, this is something that needs to really change, like in the world. I mean, how awesome would it be if countries that relied on Russia for oil decided, you know what, we're gonna actually just fix this problem by investing in renewable sources of energy, and you know, we're gonna ramp it up so that in 5 years, in 10 years, whatever, we're gonna reduce our oil dependency by 85-95%. And this is absolutely possible. It's just that, of course, the greed that plagues the powers that be is unlikely to go that route. So
sure. And another thing that I'm worried about is the war itself, because not in Russia and Ukraine, but in some other parts of the world, especially close to India and China, where Sri Lanka's economy is gone. So Sri Lanka is basically looking for a bailout from IMF, and their economic condition is very poor. So people don't have food to eat, and diesel or oil is basically non-existent in Sri Lanka. So, and they don't have any foreign currency reserves. So the problem here is that China has been kind of paying some money, lending some money to Sri Lanka, and they have their collateral as airports, some of the airports in Sri Lanka. So they're going to kind of take over those portions or those places in Sri Lanka if they don't repay the loan back to China. And another thing is, India has been very, India has been wary of this fact that China's presence in Sri Lanka is potentially a threat to Indian border security. So India is not going to let China kind of take Sri Lanka. So this kind of puts both India and China in exact crossroads opposite each other.
Interesting.
And this might actually kind of end up in a very precarious scenario, is what I'm worried about.
Well, so do you think, I mean, the fact that we've got the Sun, Mercury in the 12th, and we've got Saturn, the 10th Lord, conjoin the 8th Lord Mars, right? So two shadowy 12th and 8th factors, even the IC factors into it, as Mercury is the Lord of the IC. This to me speaks of like possible under the table kind of backdoor deals and negotiations.
Oh, there is deals that are happening.
Yeah, and it will probably increase during this time. Now, I don't know. I am curious to see how long you calculated the periods for.
No, it's exactly until the next conjunction.
Oh wow! Okay, that would make sense. So how many years are we looking at? I'm no expert.
We are looking at until So the periods are here. So we have until the February of 2024. Sorry, the April of 2024.
Oh, okay. So it's really only a couple years then.
Yes.
This. Okay. Okay. Interesting. Yeah. All right. So that gives me some idea of.
Do you want to talk about the periods?
We can if you want. I'm kind of up for whatever with it. I just trying to make heads or tails of like what I'm saying in terms of the time frame.
Yes.
And this kind of Raj Yoga situation here, which doesn't necessarily involve a whole lot of dharma, right? It involves a lot of You know, I mean,
Difficulties
11th
because
house
yeah,
is,
it's the
it can
eighth
be
house.
greed. Yeah, 8th house, you know, lack of dharma. 11th house can be greed. Not that that's its primary signification, but it can turn into that. So, you know,
But
this is again,
here,
it to me, it's like the big people, the one percenters of the world, like stomping on everybody else
yeah,
to get what they want. That's kind of what it speaks to me. Although the
right.
masses will be placated because Venus receives the moon by
Yes.
square. So whatever, well, I would argue that whatever, like, um during this 2 years there may be certain miniature rebellions having to do with like
Sure, of course.
resources and food,
No,
but
it's already
that,
happening, man. It's happening in Sri
okay,
Lanka.
well, I'm so, yeah, well, good. I'm so like out of touch with all that stuff. I just, you know, it's like I bury my head in books for the most part, so I'm glad you can fill that in.
I mean,
But the point is
it's
like,
basically literal. Whatever you said is like people of Sri Lanka don't have food.
so
It's
okay, so whatever ends up happening, I think the masses are going to be placated just enough during these next 2 years with like these kinds of crises that I'm talking about, like crisis around resources, crisis around having enough versus not having enough, survival based crises. Because, you know, we should also remember that Capricorn and Aquarius can be made to correspond to the root
right.
chakra, right? And so Mars, you know, has something to do with the root chakra because it's exalted in one of those signs. So
Yes.
looking at it from like a psycho-spiritual point of view as well, we've got kind of all this survival stuff in the mix. And yeah, I think the masses will be kind of placated. You know, people will get really pissed off and upset over whatever they're lacking. It said my connection is unstable, so they'll get pissed off and upset over what they're
Of
lacking,
course.
and then the governments and things will just kind of placate them. I think that's partly what that Raj Yoga refers to, along with the 11th second house kind of connections.
Yeah, and one more thing that I wanted to point out is like, despite the fact that uh, the war is happening and in one part of the world people don't have food and money, but I
Yeah.
think there will be countries that will be gaining so much from this
Yes,
because of this,
definitely.
the natural good placement of second and 11th house. I mean, the
Mhm.
condition of the second and 11th house. So
Yeah.
it's really you know, and it as we already spoke about it, it's kind of very visceral in terms of how the countries are trying to protect their economic priorities over anything that happens in the world. So
Right.
and yeah, that's basically I just wanted to point out. And whatever you said in terms of little riots or you know, rebel kind of things, it's already happening. So I just want to
Okay.
kind of uh, give a clear picture of that scenario. It's like
Thanks.
you mentioned that there will be riots for some kind of lack of resources or something like that, and Sri
Yeah.
Lanka is actually lacking food, oil, and almost everything, so they don't have bread.
Wow.
I think a packet of bread costs them more than 500 550 rupees, Sri Lankan rupees, which is insane inflation. So
Okay. Wow.
people don't have and even rich people in Sri Lanka who can afford to kind of buy something like that are unable to buy because it's not available. So
Wow.
it's just basically non-existent. Anything is not available there. So what happened is like people or some, I mean, the media outlets kind of call them as extremist groups. But what do you expect in a country where there is no food and water? So I mean, obviously,
Right.
people are going to kind of. I think there is a civil war situation that's already. It's kind of an African situation that's happening in Sri Lanka. So it's been happening in Africa for a very long time, but it's now
Right.
there in Sri Lanka, and people have started rioting and they've started gathering in front of the president's house, and violent things are happening there, and the police and the army are unable to kind of control it. And the funny fact is that Sri Lanka has so much of military. I mean, I think Sri Lanka has I don't know the proportion, but they have so much of military forces than police. So they have kind of mm, they have summoned all the military people to monitor all those areas where uh, the riots are actually happening.
Wow.
So it's a very difficult scenario in Sri Lanka, and civil war is almost happening. And another thing is, India and China might end up actually running for Sri Lanka, because both the countries have given so much of money, and I think India has given a total of 3 billion USD to Sri Lanka. So,
Okay.
and they're continuing to give support in terms of food and medicine and all those things. So I live
Okay.
in the border. I mean, I don't live in the border, but I live in a state which is close to Sri Lanka. So Sri
Okay.
Lanka is like a 1.5 hour flight from here. So it's
Okay.
Chennai to Colombo, it takes 1.5 hours or something. So it's pretty close. And I know for a fact that um, relief materials are being sent from Tamil Nadu to Sri Lanka. So
Okay. Okay.
things are happening, but I don't see any reprieve very soon because of
Sure.
the exact placements that we are seeing. So I think we can just move on to like the periods and
Sure. That sounds good. Yeah.
just a moment.
And yeah, as we start talking about that, I'm just to
Yeah.
let you know, I'm kind of mulling over the Jupiter's trine to Ketu and Ketu's
Yes.
trine to Jupiter, because that's so exact, and so that is kind of something else I'm thinking about, sort of mulling over.
Jupiter. Right. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, I just that speaks to me as potentially significant. It could bring a lot of dissolution and sort of destruction of relationships.
Yeah.
In one way or another, that could be on the world stage. Negotiations breaking down, or
That's right.
maybe getting help. I say breaking down only because Jupiter is also the 12th lord, and I think that even though it more powerfully rules the 9th, because that's where its Mulitrikona is, we have to like kind of put symbols together in astrology, and the 12th house capacity of Jupiter, to me, the 12th house has more in common with Ketu than the 9th house does, at least right now, in the way I think about these things. So
No, I mean,
that's why
diplomacy is not really
yeah.
succeeding. That's for sure. So,
Yeah.
but the one again, the silver lining is like by whole sign, Venus is also kind of configured to the nodes. So,
Right.
which again reinforces the idea of uh, diplomacy, because Venus
Sure.
is ruling Ketu. So for that matter, I think
It is, yeah.
yeah, and Venus is placed in the 11th house. It's in the bounds of Mercury, which is again indicating so much of communication that's probably about to happen, going back and forth. But again, we don't really, it's the situation is so overwhelming that these peace talks really don't matter anymore. So that's how things are changing.
Yeah. It's
But
kind of a facade.
yeah. So I'll just move to this periods. So the first is Aries. Aries is the first house. So we can just talk about Aries, which is, I mean, we can just quickly like
Yeah.
give some snapshots about the periods and just yeah.
Well, obviously the beginning of any kind of conjunction, and I see this in solar returns as well. Like what happens generally, the solar return seems to be most obvious around the time it's occurring, like with a month or two before, a month or two after, maybe a month or two after, maybe. It's really interesting. So obviously, like with the beginning of the conjunction, we've already seen stuff happening. I mean, it would have been so choice or perfect if that slap thing had happened on the exact day. Right. But
Right.
obviously it didn't. It happened like, about a week,
15 days before. Yeah.
15 days before. So yeah. So yeah, the Aries period, obviously what we have emphasized is Rahu and Mars. So this is, I
Uh,
mean, right, Mars Rahu is a classic one for accidents, for sudden health problems, for some kind of sudden sort of destruction or something like that. But I have seen that in a few charts of people I've read for. It's like, they you look at it's like, oh, you're
damn.
you're heading into Rahu Mars or Mars Rahu, and it's like, watch your six, check your 6 o'clock, like make sure that you're I don't know, just really aware of the possibility for accidents. And so on the world stage, I don't really know. I don't know. um I think we're kind of already seeing a lot of it. The
Yeah, sure.
slap, the Ukraine stuff keeps ramping up, whatever.
Yeah. Um, I mean, the ruler of the first house is placed in the 10th house of government. So, as I already said, it's again the theme of the government being very,
Yeah.
very Martian, and also kind of sticking to their own ideas of what they want uh, in terms of their own country, and not really kind of you know considering the global stage at the moment. Because I think it's a result of what is happening in the global stage. Everyone want to kind of protect themselves and be very sure about it, and as a result they're turning out to be Martian because of Mars placement in the 10th house. So,
Yeah.
and as you mentioned, see, I think we are going to see more accidents, more earthquakes, and probably an eruption of volcano or something like that, because you know with nodes squaring Saturn and Mars, it's and I don't know. I don't want to talk about
Yeah.
diseases. We have lived with so much of health problems for over the past probably 2.5, 3 years. So,
Yeah.
uh, but
Another
it
well
also kind
another
of promotes diseases. So,
Yeah. Um yeah, another thing to add could be too that, like, collectively this may be a period of time where people are more prone to just kind of being violently obsessive and myopic about whatever their goals are, and trying to
right,
achieve whatever things they think they're meant to achieve. But they're going to be met with resistance for sure because of that strong Saturn that we already talked about. So, you know, I think, we've been given a gift by this, this slap scenario, and we would do well to consider it. And of course, as I'm saying this, I'm probably setting myself up to to have to encounter this in my own life. Great job, Lars. But no, to just, like, as we go forward, to really, like, when we get into a situation in the upcoming months, um where where we could be prone to, like, overreacting or acting out of character. Acting out of character, I think, is the big thing, because
right,
again, supporting or not supporting Will Smith, it doesn't matter. Even his own mother said, I've never seen him do anything like that. It was very out of character for him. So that's something
right.
we can apply to our own lives. Like, am I about to do something very out of character
That is
that
unlike me.
that I yeah that I will regret later? That is like a reaction, a visceral reaction, right? So
Yes.
that's kind of my, I don't know, that's sort of like my take on this Aries period that kicks off the Saturn Mars conjunction. Is maybe that's like the thing to keep in mind.
Yeah. Right. So with that, let's move to Taurus, and
Yeah, great.
the moon is exalted in Taurus, and it's received by Venus.
Right.
So, and it
Syncretica.
emphasizes, or it's so it kind of puts an emphasis on security, and especially financial security, and moon is about people. So
Yeah.
every country wants to kind of, I mean, it is for the people. I mean, the government is for the people, and after all, if you talk about democracy, it's for the people. So
Right.
then in that case, the moon kind of plays a prominent role. At least moon is quite prominent in terms of what uh, it means, because currently everyone is going through problems. I mean, every government is going through problems because they are unable to kind of feed their people, or whatever it may be, either financially or socially or politically. So there is some kind of um, uh, unexpected scenarios or expected scenarios, but still unable to kind of deal with matters, are happening everywhere. Not just in Russia and Ukraine. So the prominence of people and the voice of people. So voice is also very important. So, and with social media being very powerful today, so the people's voice are really kind of heard everywhere. So
Right. And with this conjunction in Kritika as well, there's the possibility for like people to be sort of hypnotized, come under a kind of hypnotic spell, be easily led by those of a charismatic disposition. And with Kritika active like this, it shows like people in general, the masses, being very kind of on what
cut off.
What? Yeah, cut off, unsettled, kind of like, hungry to break free or fight back or something like this. And I kind of having this sort of spontaneous insight into like an upaya for those of us that do start to like feel this sort of like burning aching for something, is that there's a story, I think, in the Mahabharata about Agni, and about how Agni becomes capable, either cursed or capable, of consuming all things, right? Like that he can eat all things, and so on. And of course, this is true. You feed anything to a fire and it just becomes more fuel for the fire. So, I think kind of like a spontaneous remedy would be to, if you can, like burn, either literally or figuratively, right? Because you can't always burn things safely, but you can get rid of most anything, things that would be associated with Rahu, things that you have in your life. And a simple way to do this would be to just take anything that's really strange and doesn't have really any sort of function in your life currently that you own, like just any sort of objects that are lying around that just don't fit anywhere, that just seem like kind of they're junk, but they're not Saturnic junk. Saturnic junk is like, it has a logic to it. You get why it's there. You get like, okay, yeah, I was holding on to this because I thought maybe I could, like, I don't know, do whatever. Okay, but no. Like Rahu is like junk that you're like, why do I even have this? Like, why did I even? I don't even know what this is. This is so bizarre, So if you have a tendency for hoarding and stuff, of course, like this would be the most obvious one. Like people that save, like bottle can caps or whatever, like the little snap things that open a soda can. Like you just like get rid of this stuff. Like this would be actually this is of course always a powerful upaya that anyone can do, but I think during this time there's potentially like an increased benefit in doing stuff like that, burning, cutting away the things that are darkening your experience, darkening your space, your house, your room, and stuff like that.
Sure. So it's kind of bunga to your belongings. So, I think let's move to Gemini. So
Gemini sounds good. Yeah.
So the favorite part, Mercury combust and also debilitated. So communication. and no reception from Jupiter, and communication is basically BS. And
Yeah.
and you mentioned about this people. Um, I mean, this idea of polarized society. I mean, the inherent point that you made is
Yeah.
people kind of are clouded or whatever it is, and not really knowing the truth. And and as far as we know, so our only window is media, and we cannot go and see what is happening in various parts of the world.
Right.
And you see the ruler of the ninth house is actually placed in the 11th house, but the ruler of the third house, which is communication, it's actually fallen. So there is no real, connection between what's happening in the world and what is actually coming to you. So there is a lot of filth that is prominent in communication or mass media journalism industry. And no one can really bloody argue about this fact, because everyone is, they're just spreading false narratives. So there's no real news that's coming out. And any real news that comes out, YouTube just bans them. So that's basically what's happening. So
Right. It reminds me of growing up. My dad would often say to me, believe half of what you see and none of what you hear. And I think that really, really applies to this kind of 2-year stretch, at least when we're considering, Mars Saturn themes in the roughly 2-year stretch. So that's, broadly speaking, anything we're talking about here is going to be more in terms of this theme of Mars Saturn, which basically means in terms of I don't know how to encapsulate it at the moment, but but hopefully for people watching the video, you can kind of think about that and realize that it's not necessarily like fallen Mercury about everything for 2 years. It's just in reference to the kind of themes we're talking about here. And so in this situation, there's like we already talked about, like hidden backdoor deals, governments and heads of state just being really shady, stuff like that.
And it's not always kind of find fault about the situations, but it's not possible for a media outlet to kind of go and see what's happening in Ukraine, because they will get bombed. So
this is always the risk,
the inability of being there in the in the place where the event is actually happening. It is also an indication of Mercury's, Mercury kind of symbolizes that as well, because it's fallen and it's in the 12th house. So you really don't know what's happening on the other side, and you don't have the the fact that Mercury is placed in the 12th house, which is a hidden house, is attesting to the fact that we cannot go there, right? We don't know what is really happening. On the other hand, it also signifies the inability of someone to actually be in the place where the event is actually happening in order to communicate to the world, because of its fallen condition. No one can really walk into Sri Lanka or Ukraine at this point. So
and in kind of in line with that too, that shows like a frustration of sort of freedoms and willpower, and willpower, personal willpower is a big theme of the third house in Jyotish, and of course Mars is the Karaka for that. And I think it's really significant that the Lord Mercury is so debilitated and also receiving a special aspect from Saturn, which means that there's actually like Kshobita Avashta forming, in which Mercury is basically Shobita kind of means like very, very agitated, like very frustrated, very agitated. It's kind of that sort of thing. And Mars is also in aversion to the third house, so the Karaka is in aversion. Saturn is kind of this theme in both, with both planets. So this suggests to me that like just powering through things in a kind of selfish manner, like just just the sheer force of desire to obtain something or achieve something is not really going to have any sort of positive or lasting results on the global stage or on the individual stage. The individual stage or the global stage. The individual stage, like many of us, depending on how powerfully this is affecting our charts, we're not just going to be able to just power our way through obstacles. We're not going to be able to slap our way through frustrating moments. I am going to keep bringing that up because it's just a perfect analogy. Again, not taking sides in this particular video, but it's a perfect analogy. You're just like, none of us are going to be able to just pummel our way through something that's frustrating. It just ain't going to happen, so we can hurt ourselves by doing that. But that's not always true. There are other situations where in another chart, we might do another video like this later about some other conjunction. It might be the opposite. It might be, this is a period of time to really just like push through and to just kick ass and chew bubblegum and that whole thing.
So the idea of uncertainty is kind of clouding everything at this point, and there is no real certainty in terms of what we see and what we know because of this condition. So let's move on to Cancer, and Moon is placed in the second house. I think we have spoken enough about Moon in the second house and its configuration, but I think it's important to kind of throw some light on Saturn and Mars aspecting the fourth house, and fourth house being the domestic well-being and comforts of the people of the nation, and Saturn and Mars casting their powerful aspects on the fourth house means what?
It's kind of like it's what it reminds me of is the tribes in the Amazon having to flee their 1,000-year-old home because bulldozers and developers are coming in. And actually there's a wonderful movie called Medicine Man or Medicine Men. I can't remember, but it's one of those two. It's with Sean Connery. And it is a truly wonderful movie. And so I just recommend anybody that's interested in what we're saying to watch that movie, because that's kind of the movie that captures this configuration in a way.
Sure. So it's about being in a very one thing is moving out of where we live, or that's okay, that's also there, but it is also about being in a very uncomfortable place at any given time and not really feeling at home. And another thing is like another possible thing is like not feeling at home even while being at home. So that is another.
That's a really good. Perfect.
So that's one thing that we might have to consider. But given the fact that Moon is well placed, I think at the end of the day, people can kind of go and find some kind of a comfort and take care of themselves.
Definitely.
So that's something that I just wanted to touch upon.
Let's go to the Leo
fifth house of Leo. I think fifth house plays a very important role in terms of playing a creative role in reviving this community that is plagued by so much of sickness because of greed and so much of negative Martian stuff. So and the sun placed in the 12th house.
Sun placed in the 12th is unfortunate, but it's kind of the opposite scenario. It's almost exactly opposite to the Cancer scenario, where you have a strong lord but two malefics aspecting the house. Here you have a weak lord but both benefics aspecting.
Exactly.
So it's literally the opposite, almost literally. I mean, I think if the sun were maybe in Libra or something like that, it would be a little more Anyway, it's pretty dang close. So I mean, this gives us
No, actually, 12th house is Sun's accidental debility, so it's almost the same.
that's
So.
true. You're right. It is. So yeah, that's just kind of remarkable to see, and it kind of makes me think of like, there's like a ray of hope here in a way. There's
Sure.
yeah,
No,
I don't know.
I mean,
Just
the
yeah,
biggest thing is like people will find friends. I mean, countries will find
there you go.
friends.
Yeah.
And the classic example is where if you look at the map, I mean, it's very famous now. So if you look at the map as to which countries have sanctioned Russia, so you'll see only
Yeah.
few countries in the world, but the remaining 100 and 110 countries have not sanctioned Russia. So Russia is finding friends. Not that every country is Russia's friend, but I think Russia is kind of finding their hope with someone. So although whatever, I mean, we no one supports war and no one wants war. So, but they are able to find people who are actually ready to help them. So, I mean, even in a dire situation, and Sri Lanka is reeling, and Sri Lanka is finding friends in India and China. And although there are ulterior motives, but obviously at some point of time they need the helping hand. I think this 11th house, the idea of 5th house being the ruler being weak in the 12th house gives the situation of uncertainty, or gives rise to the situation of uncertainty. But the good aspect from Jupiter and Venus onto the 5th house kind of extends a helping hand. So
it really does.
You're pushed into the well, but you're also given a rope to kind of climb. So
but this reminds me of I love using stories to illustrate. It reminds me of this story I just read about this Romanian who was caught and tortured by communists in like 1953 or so, and his name was like Silvius Cristiano or something like that. I don't remember the exact name, but anyway, he had these visions of Sri Aurobindo in his prison cell, and in the visions he describes this individual and gives them a name that's very, very, it's like a bastardized version of Aurobindo Ghosh. It's like I don't remember it, but it's pretty much the same thing anyway. And he describes a man that looks just like Sri Aurobindo guiding him through literally his darkest time, like being captured and tortured by communists, getting like 3 hours of sleep. I mean, so it's just kind of like a perfect story to illustrate what's happening here in this chart. I mean, you literally have Jupiter as the 9th lord, like the guru, the Brahmana, like appearing to the person in prison, right? The sun in the 12th house. And so kind of extending this helping hand, ray of hope.
Visceral manifestation.
Yeah. So I don't know how that will work out in people's lives, but it does make me think of, like, as the 5th house does deal with discrimination, the buddhi, right, the reasoning faculty, and it deals with the Ishta Devata and things like this, that there's kind of a people's quest for deeper meaning will be ignited by whatever suffering is inflicted upon their mind during this time. And so for some people, there may be an increased capacity to like receive the grace, the light, and so on. And maybe who knows, maybe a few lucky, those of us that are really lucky, will get to have a private audience with Sri Aurobindo.
Right. So yeah, I think that's about Venus and Jupiter's aspect to 5th house. So moving to 6th house, I think we already spoke about Mercury, but 6th house is also about diseases or debts or enemies. So does it mean, like, because of Mercury's condition in the chart, it's not very strong, it's very weak, and it's also combust. So let's say that Mercury is non-existent in this chart. So I mean, it's probably an indication of end of the pandemic, or maybe they will call it as an endemic. sometime soon.
Oh,
So
okay.
that is one of the themes.
Interesting. That's a
And
pretty brilliant observation there. I'm gonna second it.
right, okay. So so that is one of the things that we may see, but I don't see any end of enmity, because as long as humanity exists, enmity is kind of,
Yeah.
it's a simultaneous thing, and it will never cease to exist. So, but I think as far as the pandemic goes, I think there is every chance for this to be uh, termed as endemic anytime during this 2-year window,
Right.
but especially during this Virgo period, which is somewhere right.
Yeah, and I'm just thinking too, like the sixth house is kind of a,
Oh, it's next year. Okay.
in a way, the sixth lord being in the 12th and being so weak is kind of like, it also potentially represents that during this period, all of our enemies are truly internalized. They're
Right.
truly internal here. There's not, people may, of course, like they always do, still try to point the finger and lay blame on others, but um it's almost like, we were talking about accidents earlier and things like that. It's almost like a Chernobyl kind of situation, where from what somebody recently told me, Chernobyl was like purely, the accident was not so much an accident as was just like the result of hubris
Okay. Yeah.
and human error in the form of like hubris and that kind of a thing. So that might be an oversimplification. I'm not an expert on the Chernobyl thing, but that's kind of like,
Right.
it's reminiscent of it here, this sort of sense of like, you know, I don't know, the sixth house is kind of a house of like what in yoga is called asmita, which is like egoistical kind of
Right.
actions and stuff. And so I think that a lot of that is it's just emphasized on this internalized level, if that makes sense.
Sure. And yeah, I think that's a notable thing in terms
Yeah.
of, yeah. So seventh house of Ketu, Libras generally liaising and dealing with people or something like that, and Ketu is placed there in the bounds of Mars.
Yeah.
So it's it's a pretty hectic thing, but I think the good thing about this seventh house is where Venus is actually well placed. So Venus is placed in the 11th house, but Venus has no dignity there. But Venus is placed in a Mitru's sign, so it's a friendly sign for Venus. Saturn and Venus are, yeah. So Venus is the yoga karaka for Saturn's both Capricorn and Aquarius. So it's a good thing that Venus is actually placed in the 11th house of Aquarius in conjunction, in a whole sign far away conjunction with another benefic, Jupiter.
Yeah, this kind of represents to me on some level as another kind of story. Ketu most simply is about like rejection and disgust of something. So it's almost like people might be at this time prone to like being very disappointed and sort of rejecting their own desires or being disgusted by their own desires. And then Venus in the 11th is kind of a metaphor for like, they're going to go elsewhere. They're going to seek some higher, more maybe alternate or altruistic ideal to follow, rather than just a personal, like, let me just get this. Because the seventh house, the third house and the seventh house to me are very, they're much more personal when it comes to the nature of desire, of kama, right? They're, third house is kind of like, I just want to have a good time, and seventh house is like, I want some specific thing. I want to get laid. I want to go here. I want to have a deal with this person. I want to have this experience. Like, I want to go there. I want to penetrate into some new kind of territory. But the 11th is where we get negatively we get things like extreme greed and kind of like a sort of hopeless idealism. But positively we get, and I think again Venus is fairly well placed here, so positively we do get that more altruistic idealism, that more like not only what is my greatest desire or ideal in life, but what is it's how does this fit into doing good for everyone?
Sure.
Fulfilling my dream so that humanity can move forward, and that kind of a thing. So yeah, this could be in the form of like, for some people it might manifest as like getting a divorce or getting out of a bad relationship, a dissatisfying relationship, and
but ending up having a good financial gain, just like what we
yeah like last time, or finding some sort of community, right? Like finding love and accord in some sort of community or new ideal or something like that. It's almost like a person leaves their life and joins some kind of a movement, perhaps. So I think this Libra Ketu thing really, and the Aquarius element, it emphasizes some sense of common humanity. Ketu is also the roots of things, the commonality of things, right?
Right.
And we especially see that as it is associated with Mula Nakshatra, the nakshatra of roots and so on. So and the nakshatra of the Pitris as well, the Magha, for example, right? And the Ashwinis, the Ashwini twins. They kind of they're there to help everyone who calls upon them. They're instant. So we do get some kind of interesting myths there when you put those two together. And anyway, now I'm just kind of
that's right. Riffing, it's quite interesting because it's a very keen observation, because the fact that the ascendant itself is placed in the Ashwini. So I was just wondering, like, whether
that's a good point. Yeah.
So if this is if this entire period is going to be like getting bashed and looking for healing, so Ashwin twins are all about healing, and
right,
and they appear from almost out of nowhere, and they kind of bring hope to people. So but having said that, I don't think 8th house of Scorpio and Mars in the 10th house brings much hope. So
it's kind of rough. It's kind of rough for sure. And then we do get the Jupiter aspect to Ketu again, here being somewhat activated. So I know what I said earlier about it with the 12th house, but this could also again just reinforce that kind of theme of finding a new hope. Star Wars: A New Hope. That's it's like that kind of a deal.
Sure.
Going to the furthest reaches of the galaxy. Actually, there's a great show out now on Apple TV called Foundations, based off the Isaac Asimov series, which was a sci-fi novel series. And without giving too much away, there is this theme of kind of like longtime enemies becoming the strongest of allies in kind of the ultimate battle, the battle to not necessarily fighting against any particular individual, but fighting the good fight to lessen the time of the dark ages. And we ourselves are, according to the ancient Indian calculations, in the Kali Yuga still, the darkest of ages. But to me, this is on a side note, the time periods given are potentially more metaphorical than they are literal, and this show kind of posits a similar thing, this this character who develops a very powerful predictive system, not unlike Jyotish, says that basically we are definitively headed into a dark age, but based on what we do now will determine whether or not the dark age will last for 30,000 years or 1,000 years. So, similar to real life, where we're in the Kali Yuga, we're in the dark age, and there's nothing we can do to change that. However, the more we collectively, individually, and so on attempt to align ourselves internally with, I don't know, the forces of light, let's say, just whatever you want to call it, right?
Right.
Then that potentially can create like sort of micro movements that can counteract like the darkest aspects of this dark age,
Right.
So anyway, that's kind of yeah, there's another story for people to.
Yeah, but
Jupiter.
I mean, that
K2.
was kind of related to the whatever we wanted to say, but just one thing where it kind of this war tension is always kind of existent during these 2 years, and the governments are always like on the cat on the wall scenario as far as the war matter is concerned. So I think the tension is going to be present throughout this period, I think, until at least the April 2024. So
yeah, so
that's a major theme. And moving on to the 9th house of Sagittarius, Jupiter in the 11th house, it is a very good
but we don't want to skip the 8th house.
I think we just spoke about the 8th house. So
okay, we spoke enough of the dark age stuff.
Yeah,
the war. Okay,
yeah.
Fair enough.
So that's what. So
the 9th house, Jupiter is very well placed.
So
overall,
Jupiter is well placed, but still Jupiter is in the bounds of Saturn, which kind of brings a lot of limitation to the 9th house Jupiter, which means there is a lot of limitation that the foreign diplomacy is facing. So there is a boundary within which where they need to work, and it is a hurdle unto itself as far as finding a peaceful solution is concerned. So that's not a very good sign, but I think this whole sign conjunction of Jupiter with Venus, which naturally promotes dialogue and diplomacy, is one of the good things that we can find here. And another important factor is that both Jupiter and Venus are not really in any hard aspect. So so they're not really afflicted, and they're in 11th house, which is good. So I think this period will be a reasonably good period to kind of break the madness or come out of this crazy mode. So it's somewhere around the August 2023 to October 2023. So early August to early October. So and that is one of the. I think this is one of the bright periods during these 2 years, because there is no Saturn Mars influence except for the fact that Jupiter is placed in the bounds of Saturn. Because when we spoke about 7th house, we cannot ignore the nodes, so which always creates imbalance. And apart from that, there is the 2nd house was reasonably good, as just like the 9th house. So. And another thing is 9th house is the higher trend, so the house of dharma. So I think and the midheaven is placed in dharma, although it's in Martian bound. So let's just hope that we find righteousness, at least if it is through some Martian way. If the end of the road shows righteousness, I think that's something that everyone would take. So with I think that's pretty much the theme of. Did you want to say something about?
I don't think so. I
Okay.
mean, I think this is kind of what happens when we do these periods is like a lot of themes start to repeat by the time you
Yes,
get to
yes,
like
yes.
seventh, eighth,
Right. Yeah.
ninth house. So yeah,
So
so no, this is good. And
10th house, I think we spoke enough about governments. So the governments are going to be very Martian and
yeah,
Saturnian, more
well,
Martian.
and
So
I think we should also we should really at this time too, and when the period does get active, or the Capricorn period gets activated
yeah,
via the dashas, we really do need to zero in on Mars as the eighth lord and Saturn being a natural karaka of the eighth house. Even though it's in its own sign, I think that this is a classical uh, kind of situation. It would be more assured if the fifth lord were more directly involved, because it's
right.
the eighth from the 10th. But this is kind of a, in a birth chart, this is like a destruction, a sudden change or destruction of one's career or public image. So yeah, collectively this can be like the downfall of certain leaders, and things like that.
Sure.
I mean, this is a perfect, again, this is a perfect thing to represent that slap,
Right.
because for Will Smith, this, for better or worse, this has potentially marred his career for the rest of his life. It hasn't necessarily destroyed it, but it's certainly created some problems for him that he may have to deal with down the
I
road.
mean, yeah. I mean, he has to see at the end of the day, he has to kind of face the results of the choice that he made. Uh,
Right.
it's an
And so I
impulsive
think
one, but still, yeah.
that's what we're looking at for, virtually any situation applied to any, individuals or governments during, not only during this 10th house activation, but arguably during this whole 2-year period. That's the theme. It's
Sure.
just probably going to be more pronounced uh, uh, in the beginning, and perhaps when we get to this 10th house activation. So, for those of us who aren't heads of state, who aren't giant celebrities and so on,
Yeah.
that's a period where we're going to be looking at, the direction in our lives, the things we're trying to achieve in our lives, and there may be some sudden shift in it, some kind of, and this could honestly, like, it may be painful at first, but based upon the dignities and the configurations, it could also open a lot of doors
Definitely.
for those of us who are more adept at dealing with change well. And human beings were kind of funny, because we crave change, but we also fear it. Change is the
Yeah.
only constant. We crave a constant that is not change, but that doesn't really exist. So it's kind of like in our own lives, if the shit hits the fan kind of thing, it's an opportunity to get a new fan, hopefully.
Right.
And whatever, that kind of a thing. So
So, and I think it's kind of whatever I'm going to say is kind of related to both 10th and the 11th house theme. So maybe we can just shift our focus to the 11th house and bring it on.
sure.
So uh, again, Aquarius is one of the better periods because of two
Yeah,
benefits.
it's like a breath of fresh air, right?
Yeah, right. But there is a little bit of carbon dioxide that you may have to breathe in, because Saturn is placed along with Mars in the 12th house, which is the 12th from the 11th.
Yeah.
So, but the thing is, 11th house is always about gains. But because Saturn is placed with Mars, which is the 8th ruler, I think the gain is always going to come at someone's loss. So
Yep.
it amounts
And
to,
Jupiter's the 12th lord too, even
sure.
while he's the 9th lord. So
Yeah, right. So it's
yeah,
always
there's
going to
a
come at
gain through a
someone's,
loss.
yes,
Yeah.
someone's big loss. So which is not so good, but I think that's the beauty of imbalance and humanity, right? So the nodes are, Saturn and Mars are kind of squaring the nodes, and nodes are all about imbalance, and we have to deal with this imbalance. So
Yeah.
the thing is, like, capitalist countries are very, I'm not saying it in a wrong sense, but Commonwealth capitalist countries are very booming, while the countries like Sri Lanka and many countries in Africa are actually struggling to kind of feed their people. So
Right.
there is this gross imbalance that we have to deal with in this world as a human race. So I think that's going to kind of come to the forefront during this period, where the roles of UNICEF or UNESCO and all these people will ultimately come to actual purpose. So we will see what happens. But I think the idea of someone losing something and someone gaining something,
Yeah.
I think at the end of the day, the right thing or dharma is to kind of distribute things to people who really don't have something. So I don't want to sound like a communist here, but I think at the end of the day, there will be a situation where people will have to kind of distribute things, like how China and India are actually supporting Sri Lanka. Not that only China
Yeah.
and India, but
Yeah.
many countries are kind of extending their helping hands. The United States is kind of donating so many $1 trillion every year to various countries across the world. So I think this is kind of going to be the theme of this particular period, where someone will gain, but at the end of the day, when the 12th house period begins, which is the Pisces period begins, I think the distribution might have to start. But I'm not sure how it is going to be, but I think there will be a lot of helping hand that might actually uh, helping hands that extend their support during this period to various countries. So I think it will just come to prominence. It's always been there, it's always existing, but I think
Yeah.
it will just come to prominence, and many people, even individuals, will go ahead and do their bit to kind of save this human race.
I hope you're right. Yeah, I think with the, I mean, the 12th lord being in the 11th, and also of course being the 9th lord, there's kind of like the dharma to spend money on hopefully righteous charitable
Yes,
causes and things like that, like taking your gains, you being anyone or any country or anything, right? Like, but taking your gains and putting it towards some sort of noble,
yeah,
charitable, dharmic kind of endeavor. Because there's always expenses, there's always loss with the 12th house and the 12th lord. But in this case, because we have a benefic ruling it, and we do have, the sun is a naturally sattvic planet, and Mercury is arguably sattvic if you follow the scheme that I outlined a long time ago based on
yeah,
Yavana Jataka. Mercury, it becomes sattvic because it's associated predominantly with sattvic planets
yeah,
and influences here. So
sure,
there's a lot of sattva happening, and sattva, of course, is the most, the most selfless and creative of the gunas. So that kind of brings another ray of hope and whatnot. And fifth house is also Purva Punya, right? Like
yes,
merits acquired from auspicious deeds in previous lives and stuff. So it's kind of like in the 12th house, using one's Purva Punya for spending it in a sense on um, to help others, right?
right,
To help in a humanitarian crisis. The 12th house and Pisces always also naturally refer to collective crises.
yes,
Collective crises. So and we get some more of that again with the, like I said earlier, the 6th lord being in the 12th, referring to internal struggles, but also here referring to like that you maybe more people will innately be driven to realize that, oh, my individual struggle is actually innately linked with the collective struggle. It's not just about me.
right,
So that could be another positive aspect of this configuration, which initially looks so depleting and negative, and it's not without its potential pain and whatnot. But this is kind of, again, the ray of hope that we're getting from these benefics in the 11th. And
Right.
I think that wraps it up for me.
Yeah, I think that it's the 10th, 11th, and 12th are so very related, and
Yeah.
it's difficult to kind of talk about it in terms of detached topics. So I
Right,
think that
right.
pretty much brings us to the end of this discussion. So
I really enjoyed it. So thanks for having me on again.
thanks. It's too late for you there, but I think you made it. So thanks very
Yeah, I
much.
made it.
And yeah, so maybe we can just meet at some point and discuss another topic.
Sounds good. Yeah.
So,
And
so people can
yeah.
find your work at heavenlybranches.com.
Yes.
So, okay. Thank you so much. And that's it for this video.
All right.